we've got a longer time to sort of unravel some things. I'm going to read you what I wrote following the first meditation, just to give you a little feeling of where I am. We make ourselves real by telling the truth. Martin was such a prophet. In this era of the big lie, somebody, maybe George Orwell once said, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. Um, so what I'm about to speak is the truth as I see it. How we see is what we see. I don't think anybody's got 100% of the truth, no human anyway. And or I think it's really almost impossible for somebody to have 100% of untruth. We all have a little bit of it. And it all depends sort of on how you see and from where you see. If you're seeing from deep fear, the world looks a certain way. And if you're seeing from radiant love, it looks another way. you know. So here goes. This is just how I see it right now, and hopefully it'll be helpful somewhat. Uh, the sort of text or frame for this, although I'm not sure it'll be the title of the how it's posted on YouTube in a couple days, but it's was about being peace in the midst of tumultuous times. Yeah, so I want to dedicate this talk. I really dedicated the whole day in my own heart to our whole retreat to my nephew Jimmy, who uh, graduated into the next realm uh, on election day, and at 60. Yeah. So the first thing to look at is when you've been hurt. The fork in the road appears, and there's two paths. You could go down one path as you're hurt to hurt somebody else. So they say hurt people hurt people. Well, most of the time, probably, but not all the time. There is another path. You can blame somebody. You can try to get revenge. You try to hurt them back, tit for tat, Hatfields and McCoys, whatever you want to look at it. But there is another path, and it's a path to healing, and I'm interested in uh, exploring that today. That's just the true way that I see it. No matter what the hurt, no matter what the grief, no matter what the loss, you can you of course can take neither path and just try to go numb with it, and that happens sometimes just initially, or maybe for decades. Or you could go into hurting those who you perceive hurt you, or to healing not only yourself but the whole world. Now I want to reflect on the screensaver for a minute. So because some guys just coming in didn't see it, but I think there's something to learn from the screensaver itself. Yeah, Mona Lisa's made her appearance during these 4 years a few times. And then there's the cover of one of the two books I would really recommend for this stretch of the road, uh, uh, Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny. This is the new version, which has great illustrations. His original book, which I had, it came out right after the 2016 election, and 8 years later, it's riveting reading, and it's very simple. 20 lessons from the 20th century about how do you deal with authoritarianism. You can call it fascism, you can call it Nazism, you can call it communism. When you get into one person having a whole lot of power over the rest of the people, it all looks the same. So anyway, now I want you to look at the two images there. I think we can actually reflect on this and learn something. Looking at Mona Lisa, 1492, Da Vinci didn't even finish the picture. Actually, the fingers aren't finished. He was a 7 on the Enneagram. He had so many irons in the fire, he probably went on to doing a tank or something or a flying machine. But he caught something here. 1492 in Italy was not a peaceful place. It was much like today. It was like wars between cities, walled cities. There's a wall around Verona. There's a wall around, all these northern Italian cities, and they were fighting one another. And so it wasn't like the peace that radiates from this picture. Uh, it didn't come from the world that was around her, and that's what she's catching. Now let's look at two things. Compare the two images. Look at the head on both of the pictures, and uh, and I think on Tyranny, my guess is the head is meant to be disconnected from the body. Uh, the head of the country is disconnected from the body politic, from the rest of us. Maybe that's a little bit in it, and of course it's mechanical, it's robotic. Now you look at the face of Mona Lisa. That people always talk about the smile, and there is that, but there's peace there. There's peace in the whole picture in the world. Got to remember that. For you art history students, probably know this, but women were never pictured in the world. If women were pictured at all in portraiture, it was in the house, even if the house was the throne room, if you're a queen or a princess, with symbols of your role. This is a woman in the world. It's just quite remarkable. They didn't even do many landscapes at that time. So what he communicated was, how could a woman in the world, out in the world, be at peace? That's still a really good question. Even a bigger question now in our culture, and just the immediate shift from this election. I had one woman was I talked to many women during the week on the election, and there's a lot of. I mean, as a man, I really had to come to grips with the fact that there was a deeper grief in the women I was talking to than I was feeling, and many of them explained that or tried to communicate that to me, and I really felt that, and I do feel for that. But one woman said, "Well, the current meme on TikTok talk is your body, my choice." I don't hang out on TikTok, and part of the problem, that we're dealing with, where people are hanging out with most of their your body, my choice. Um, it's a message there, and it's sort of frightening. Look at the hands on both pictures. You can see the different feeling of the world, the fists and well, the build, the upper arms and all that, and the fists ready to fight and tense. And then look at her hands. I used this originally back in the early days when I was traveling giving retreats. I remember in Tennessee, I gave a retreat using this picture, and I said, "This is Italian meditation." She's at peace, and her hands have a lot to do with it. The way she's just resting, she's just resting. Yeah, yeah. I want you to see this, and also because this is what we're looking at, the two paths, the two paths. Yeah, in picture form. All right. Well, we'll go from there. Get that off. Yeah. Whoops. Where am I? There we go. By the way, the notes today will have the notes I'm working off will have some things, some recommendations in them, and even some recommendations for books and movies. Another book besides Tim Snyder's book, and three movies that I find would be like good resources during this time to and it'll be included in the notes. All I have to do is send me an email, loose leaf hollow at gmail.org, and I'll and just put notes in the thing. And especially if you're new here, there's a few new people here. I don't have your email. I really haven't met you. Be nice for you to send for the notes, and then I could add you to the email list. Okay, so let's uh, let's look at just the form of this talk for a minute now. I can, you know, many people I talked to this week just said, "What happened? What were they thinking?" And so I want to look at that for a minute and give you my view. I'm not on social media and I'm not on even cable news right now, but I'm aware that everybody's trying to dissect this election and put blame where it should be. I'm not interested in that, but I have sat with it quite a lot because I had that question: how did this happen? What were they thinking? You know, and and so I want to break it down for you a little bit. At least what I've come up with. Again, this is just how I see it. Maybe if anything sounds like wisdom, hold on to it. I think the Republicans went with a tried and true approach, which is called enemy formation. It's classic. It didn't start with Donald Trump, and it didn't start with Adolf Hitler. Goes all the way back. It draws on a kind of pre-rational tribal uh, consciousness, uh, fueled by fear. We all have this. This is a default setting for what we've come to call the survival operating system. Anything different, anything other could be dangerous. Other tribe, other animals, different sounds that we hear in the night. You see, uh, so, and you can coalesce a lot of people by manufacturing, even if it doesn't exist, a common enemy. In this election, it was immigrants coming over the border. It goes on and on, but that was the main one. It's the oldest playbook there is, and it does work as we've seen. Now that doesn't mean I can't look into the hearts and minds of everybody that voted Republican, but and I'm sure there was a lot of different reasons. But in terms of the approach, it was pretty clear that it was enemy formation. Immigrants are the enemy. People with brown skins are the enemy. Liberals are the enemy. Women are the enemy. Now, when you look beneath that, and there's the reason I chose Lord of the Rings soundtrack today was because Lord of the Rings is about this darkness that's coming, and and how you deal with that. And the interesting thing about the Lord of the Rings is that the solution to the problem comes from just ordinary people, little people, hobbits. Frodo throws the ring into Mount Doom, into the fire. It wasn't all the big fighters like Aragorn, and it was actually up to just common people to be heroes. I like that, but the shadow is something we need to talk about. Uh, the shadow that's starting to extend across Middle Earth. Well, the shadow is something we got to deal with, and the shadow that was projected over all this was racism, white supremacy, especially misogyny, uh, and patriarchy. Those three parts of this culture in our country, um, these are the shadows that we have not grappled with. A couple of the movies I'm suggesting deal with South Africa and India, and how cultures either do or do not actually confront the shadow and work their way through it. We still have a strong shadow of white supremacy, which is racism, which is xenophobia, anybody who does not look like us. Uh, Unfortunately, when the uh, Protestant guys landed in this country, when they saw the dark people, they saw them as non-human, That's also part of the whole thing, dehumanization, languaging, talking about people as vermin and less than human. If something is vermin, you can do anything you want with it. And uh, misogyny was in full display, and patriarchy comes in to explain something interesting. How I think many uh, evangelical Christians who want a white Christian nation. Well, who does that leave out? A lot of people. But they're very Old Testament oriented. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And that idea of going back, let's make America great again like it once was, that idea about going back is key, and going back to the patriarchy, which is let the strong man do it. So he'll fix it. It was actually spoken in that where I'm the only one who can fix it. Maybe even a Messiah. All that thinking that somebody's going to come and make everything great, which result, which it's nice to, it's magical thinking, but it's nice to think, and it is uh, all balled up with the patriarchy. I mean, you had the way I saw it, a brilliant black woman who actually had a different vision. Also in the Jewish scripture in Proverbs, it says, when there is no vision, the people perish. And so there was two visions there that couldn't be different. And a little bit more than half the people who voted went for um, a darker vision, in my estimation, and one that actually went back to the past. Um, let's get a strong man to fix everything. Daddy will do it. And in that image, the strong man was a king. Yeah. So we're either going to deal with this, and this is a long process for our culture to deal with our own cultural shadow, with white supremacy, with misogyny. Misogyny didn't start in America, it's about 10,000 years old, but different cultures deal with it better or worse. And we just took all the books off the shelf, you see. We don't want kids even to read about any of this. And then, sexuality had a lot to do with the thing too, just beating on all kinds of, unless you were a man and a woman in a marriage with 12 kids, you're somehow deviant. That was put out there. Yeah. Single people, single women, geez, what are they doing just with their cats? So so the question is, quo vadis, that's the classic Latin term for where are we going? Where are we going? How to proceed? Well, all right, here's the poem that came out this week. It was a rough week in many ways, especially with uh, losing my nephew, grandson. But and this poem will be in the notes. This poem will be in the mail out on Monday as well. It's called Seeing No Enemies. This is sort of my response to the whole thing. How do we go forward? Seeing no enemies. Mental illness is the greatest threat to the well-being of the planet and to the survival of organized human life. Mental illness is the greatest threat to the well-being of the planet and to the survival of organized human life. So we welcome poor, ill brothers and sisters who value power, profit, possessions, or prestige more than people, more than the planet, and even more than the presence that sustains us all. So we welcome our poor, ill brothers and sisters who value power, profit, possessions, or prestige more than people, more than the planet, and even more than the presence that sustains us all. We need more than a change of political parties. We need a healing and an evolution of consciousness. That will take time, spiritual practice, and community. We need more than a change of political parties. We need a healing and an evolution of consciousness. That will take time, spiritual practice, and community. The work that we alone can do cannot be done alone. The work that we alone can do cannot be done alone. So, a warm welcome to the way of revolutionary love. Yeah, let me just reflect on these lines a little bit. But this is a vision. You know, the people perish without a vision, and your own spiritual walk. You have to have a vision of what you're following. What is the star you're following? I talked earlier about, and I'll talk in subsequent talk, devote to having a sacred word. That's in a lot of traditions, and in this word is like a capsule that just it's like a compass that says, what star am I following in this life? Yeah, and so this is seeing no enemies is the title, because as long as you see enemies, you'll be in fear. And doesn't mean that other people actually couldn't hurt you or anything like that, but it's just a basic vision, seeing no enemies. Uh, and it starts with mental illness is the greatest threat to the well-being of the planet and to the survival of organized human life. I'm convinced the planet is resetting, and the planet has been through this before. Meteor, off the Yucatan Peninsula, threw up so much stuff in the atmosphere. We had sort of 10 years, they figure, of like a kind of nuclear winter where all the vegetation died and all the bigger animals died. There were only little burrowing kind of mammals that could survive that. We came from those guys, and it reset. And it came back, and that's probably only one of the times in the history of the planet. So I have no doubt the planet is suffering now, and it will come back. It's resetting. Why do you think the weather is so dangerous now and so extreme? But I think the real threat of mental illness uh, here is to the survival of organized human life as we know it. Most of the world's population in all the continents lives on the coast, because we came out of the water, out of the ocean onto land, and still the majority of those, and if you're in tropical islands, it's really already, some have been lost, but most of the people in this country live on the coasts. And then in Australia, it's almost total for that whole continent. They're living on the coast, and the coasts are where the extreme weather is hitting. Organized human life. Talk to people in Asheville, North Carolina, about organized human life. And so, you know, you have to welcome, what I call our poor ill brothers and sisters. Now, that doesn't mean everybody who voted Republican had mental illness, but I think the vision given the Native Americans, actually, the Iroquois Confederation in northern New York, and then the Canadian Native Americans, they had a word for the colonial people who were invading their territory and trying to wipe them out. They had a word for it. They had several words for it, actually, but the one word that they shared is, there was no border between Canada and upstate New York, of course. So there was tribes were all there, but the word, and sometimes they were meeting French colonial guys, and then most little guys, Native Americans were meeting British, European guys, but mostly British Protestant folk. And the word was the same. They shared this word. It was called Wetiko, Wetiko in our language. And they called them Wetiko, and it just meant mentally ill. These people are crazy, and basically because they took more than they needed. they're, this rapacious nature of taking more than you needed from nature. They saw it early on, and they said these people are mentally ill. They're sort of they're cuckoo, and uh, and so we welcome our poor ill brothers and sisters. And what makes you ill? If you value power, profit, possessions, or prestige more than people. If that's your value system, power, profit, possessions, or prestige, you more than people, more than the planet. I mean, look at the policies, and even more than the presence that sustains us all. That's to me is a mentally ill approach. I mean, this is just my view. Uh, and the first thing, they value power. They also the Lord of the Rings. The whole thing was to get to one ring, to gather all the rings, to be a total power. Sauron wants to be totally controlling everything, and this is an addiction. This and in our country, the way I see it is there's a consolidation of power going on, rather than the way you know you're in a whether you are or are not in a cult is the direction of how the power goes. If the power all goes towards one point, one man, you're in a cult. And if the power goes out from people to each other, kind of radiant kind of thing from the center to all points, then you're in a community. And we're on the level of the cult here. The way I see it, they're trying to concentrate power. Very few people. Corporations are part of that too, of course. But we have to welcome them. We can't make an enemy out of them. I mean, just the way, the only way that I'm, the only way that I can see to go forward is to see these people just as you would see somebody who's a mentally ill person. You wouldn't hate them. They're unbalanced right now if they value power and profit more than the people around them, or the planet, or the presence, or the sacred. Yeah, what's sacred now in this culture? Just look at media. It's telling you. Okay. So we need more than a change of political parties, because there's people in both parties and independents and whatever. They want power. But the question is, what do they want it for? And will it go out to heal the people as a whole, we the people, or will it be just for a very few? How you see it is how you see it. This is how I see it. And we need more than a change of politics and change of parties. Politics can't do it. There has to be underneath the politics, because if you're coming from tribal consciousness, which is brainstem, which is fear fueled, you'll see a certain thing and you'll act a certain way. And violence comes from that. Okay. And it's meant to, on a very primitive level, you might have to fight, you might have to run. But this is another thing entirely. Or are you coming from uh, another state of consciousness? Even reason is a kind of bridge between tribal brainstem and what we call the heart, which is involved with wisdom and compassion. This will take time. Can't be solved in an election cycle. Can't be solved in probably several of them. So this is the road goes on forever, as Tolkien said, and this is a long road. And I'm here for the long ride. I've been doing this kind of work for 50 years now, and it is the star that I follow. I'm really trying to keep doing the work myself, and then build a community, encourage a community, likewise, to keep developing their consciousness. We're meant for more than this. And as I say at the end of the poem, the work that we alone can do, in other words, nobody can sit down in the sacred silence once a day for you. Although I do sit for every one of you, and I'm sitting now till Christmas Eve with my nephew Jimmy, who's in this graduated to this other level of consciousness, whether he knows it or not. I keep staying in touch with him though. Uh, nobody can sit for you in a way. You've got to do the primary work. Nobody can live your life. So that's the work that we alone can do, but then cannot be done alone. Nobody can make this trip without a community. You see that in the Lord of the Rings. You see that in life. There's we need each other, and I'm so grateful every day, and especially when we're here together, uh, to be practicing together, to have this community. This community came out of the dark. If you're new, you don't know that, but uh, March of 2020, in the darkest times of the pandemic, this community was born, and as a as a way to get through that darkness. I couldn't have made it myself. Uh, and many people, I feel the gratitude for that. That 30 of you showed up today on a Saturday when you could have been doing a lot of other things. And some of you have showed up from the very first day and 4 years ago. I'm immensely gratified for that. I feel deep gratitude. And Jesus was really about, what Yeshua was really about. He wasn't, again, I try to keep reminding people that Jesus wasn't a Christian. And he certainly wasn't white, and he certainly wasn't interested in nationalism. He was a Jew that had a very different idea about our relationship to the sacred, so different from the temple society and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, so different that they helped the Romans get rid of them. It certainly wasn't, that he knew about being under imperial power. Jesus lived under the boot of the Romans, as did all the people who heard his message. And for, you know, 300 years, they lived in community based on his idea of revolutionary. Yeah, yeah. Uh, Here's an image that might help. And then I want to talk a little bit about revolutionary love. Love is a problem. Revolution is a problem. We got to deconstruct those words a little bit, because in our culture, we think love is about romance. Ever since the you know 15th century, we've had that in the West. And when you say love, it means falling in love. We're not talking about that. Now, here's an image. Here's a question and then an image. Is the darkness that we're in now, is it the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb? That's a big difference. It is dark in both cases. When we were in the womb of our mothers, it was a kind of darkness. It was actually quite a shock to be born into a world with light in the operating room or wherever we were. But this darkness that we're feeling now, is it, there's the tendency at first to feel like, oh, wow, this is the end or something. It's just, we're finished. It's the darkness of the tomb. Uh, but maybe it's the darkness of the womb, in which case, in time, as this new thing forms, something new will be born. I tend towards that view totally. I think Jesus tended towards that view totally, especially the community that grew out of him. It was about rebirth. It was about coming out of the tomb, you see. Now, I mentioned this last time, that the midwife's wisdom is what we need to learn now, the midwife's wisdom. A midwife uh, that you have at a birth, you know, she teaches you. Uh, it's all about knowing how and when to breathe. We've been working on the breath a lot lately. Knowing how and when to breathe, and knowing how and when to push. That's what gives birth. These two things, breathing and pushing. That's how do stuff is born, and that's where we are. There would be stand-ins for contemplation and action, you see. those aren't opposites, but there is a time uh, to breathe, and there is a time to push. This is really a time to breathe now in the for me on two levels with the losses. As Merton said, how I pray is breathe. He was quite a prophet there, and he was in a long tradition, and that goes for all the traditions. There's something about the breath. I mean, we call this inspiration. We call this expiration. And so the spirit is involved with this. The breath is how I pray is breathe. And so we're in a place where you got to really do some breathing now because it's a loss. And, we have losses every day. And so the first thing is contemplation, breathing. And then the outflow is the action. It's contemplation in action. There's this even out of Jesus' gospel, they can make dualism. Martha and Mary. Martha is the woman of action, and Mary was the contemplative. Well, actually, I think the best way to read that story is there are two parts of you. Every one of us has a way to take a breath to connect with the sacred, with the real energy system we have, and then go into what needs to be done, what needs to be pushed. You see. That's a very different image. And the other book I'm recommending that'll be in the notes is a book that was Timothy Snyder wrote the first version of this book, uh, of his book on tyranny after the election of 2016, 8 years ago, and then Valerie Carr, spelled Kaur, wrote her book, which was See No Strangers, at that same time. And she started with this midwifery image of knowing how and when to breathe and knowing how and when to push. I have that in the notes. You don't have to remember to write it down if you get to notes. But both of those I'm rereading both of those books now that I read 8 years ago, and they read well. It's quite inspirational. And Valerie is also a Sikh. This interesting religion that flowered up. It's spelled usually Sikh. Some people call them Sikhs, but really they would call it Sikh. And Muslims, and it grew up 500 years ago. Muslims and Hindus were killing each other and warring. And then the guru from this tradition said, there are no Muslims, there are no Hindus, we're all one. It's very strong emphasis. And these would be the guys that you see with turbans, the men. And actually, the first hate crime after 9/11 was a Sikh that was killed in Arizona because they thought he was a Muslim. Well, even the idea that all Muslims are terrorists is, you know, it's wrong. But they thought then this guy was a guy who was trying to bring peace between the war. That was really ironic. Uh, there was a Sikh temple up in Wisconsin that a guy came in and shot it up a few years ago, thinking they were Muslims. These were really people of peace. So, revolutionary love, just a few words on that because we're about at the end. But, you know, Buddha, he had his version of it. And then 500 years later in the Middle East burst this guy called Yeshua, Jesus. And they trying to pin him down and whatever and trap him. And, what's the most important commandment? And he sort of did an end run because he said, oh, well, most important commandment, there are two. He said, to love God with your whole body, mind, and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, neither one of those are actual commandments, for the Jewish religion. He said basically, love God with your whole body, mind, and soul. In other words, connect with the sacred dimension. And that will allow you to do this, the second, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, one of the Pharisees said, well, who is our neighbor? And then he gave him something that was totally revolutionary. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. Well, the Samaritans were the enemies of the Jews. You wouldn't even walk through Samaria. And these are the Palestinians of today. That's where they were. That was the territory. And the hero of the story was the Samaritan who uh, helped a beat up Jew in the ditch. That blew everybody's mind. The Samaritans, they're our neighbors. They're the good ones. I mean, it was revolutionary. Okay, and and then his parables show you how you can. We've been through those. At least uh, my view, based on the Aramaic parables, of that they were stages of ripening, stages of becoming a revolutionary lover, and it doesn't happen all at once, you know. Uh, and the word love, for instance, we got to make depending on who you consult, there is between 6 and 9 words for love in the Greek vocabulary. Eros, this sort of total pull to either have sex or drugs, rock and roll, whatever it is. It's this kind of impulsive just pull. Uh, uh, that's one of them. And then we made up falling in love in the 14th century, 15th century. Uh, that wasn't actually a part of it, but agape meant a love for anything that didn't want anything in return. You just love because that's what you do. That's what Jesus is talking about, not transactional. I'll love you if you love me. I'll love you if you like me. That's totally transactional love. That's a certain kind of love. It's not what revolutionary love is. That's the only way you could love your enemies. It's the only way you could love people who are actually hurting you is that you you know they're mentally ill. You know that people who are doing that are here hurting other people to get something, and you don't hate them. Hatred is never going to solve this problem. Now the movies that I suggested, Gandhi, Selma, and Cry Freedom, India, uh, our own Jim Crow South, and then Cry Freedom was in the late 70s. The Stephen Biko, how he Denzel Washington plays Stephen Biko. He's great. Uh, and how the revolution, a love revolution in South Africa, but in South Africa went all the way because after it just wasn't that uh, black people were representative. They had to reconcile with the white Afrikaners, and they did that. They faced the shadow, and they worked through it. And they still have problems, but they did something. The Germans faced the shadow of Hitler and that whole all that it was, and they did that work. We have not done that work. We have to do it individually, and then uh, the culture is going to come around. It'll take a while. Well, I think that's good enough for now. If you want the notes, just send me email notes, looseleafhall@gmail.com. I'll be glad to send them to you. Okay, I think that's enough.